Have you ever imagined that the cell phone in your hand right now could be brought to someone to save their life by a dog? It sounds like a scene from a movie, but this story is real and happened in a moment of despair when all seemed lost. When everyone lost hope, 4 paws became the last chance for survival. What you're about to discover may surprise you, so stay with me until the end, because this story will make you look at your dog differently. It was early morning. The house was silent, and no one could have imagined what was about to happen. In an instant, everything changed. A sudden accident left the owner lying on the ground, unable to move or call for help. And that's when the improbable happened. The family dog not only realized something was wrong, but took action that no human present could have expected. He grabbed the cell phone in his mouth and bolted down the dark street, as if he knew exactly what he needed to do. Have you ever been there, feeling completely helpless, not knowing who to turn to? Imagine watching your 4-legged best friend transform into your hero in that instant. This story isn't just about courage. It's about instinct, love, and the incredible connection between humans and dogs. Researchers say dogs can recognize expressions of pain, pick up on emotions, and even remember actions they've seen their owners perform. Could this be what guided this dog that night? With each step, he carried more than just an object. He carried the hope that someone would answer the other end of the line, that someone would come to his aid before it was too late. And when the phone finally reached the right hands, everything changed again. A ring, a call, a race against time. This sequence of events is proof that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear collars. Stay with me until the end, because you'll be amazed at people's reactions when they find out what happened. And at the lessons we can learn from this story to better care for our own dogs and even train them in life-saving behaviors. Now let's go back to that pivotal moment and understand step by step how this dog became the link between danger and salvation. And as you try to imagine that moment, the cell phone, dangling between the dog's teeth, the silent street, the desperate race for help, I want to invite you to be part of this story. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most, or share a similar experience you've had with your dog. Sharing these memories isn't just moving. It's what creates a community of people who recognize the value of these 4-legged heroes and who together learn to better protect those they love. If this story touched you, like the video, this simple gesture helps other families see the power of life-saving dogs and allows stories like this to reach more people who may need to hear it. And if you want to continue receiving real stories, tips on canine behavior, and practical ideas for training your friend to act in emergencies, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription keeps this work alive and gives us the strength to investigate, verify, and tell each new story with respect and responsibility. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. It's not advertising. It's a partnership. Every comment, every like, and every new subscription transforms an isolated story into a wave of awareness that can save lives. Now, returning to the moment when everything was hanging by a thread, let's follow step by step how that last call came to pass and why, even amidst the panic, small details made all the difference. That night began like so many others. The clock struck 3:12 a.m. The house at number 42 on Rua das Acacias, the lights off, and the silence that seems solid when everyone is asleep. Roberto, a 58-year-old man who lived with his wife and dog, Thor, got up early for work and went out that morning to get something from the kitchen. No one imagined that a minute later, life would take a different turn. Shortly before 3, a sudden illness, perhaps a stroke, perhaps a fall, caused Roberto to lose consciousness and fall, unable to reach his cell phone on the coffee table. The scene that followed is simple to describe, but impossible to forget. The motionless body, the heavy silence, the changing rhythms of breathing, and Thor beside him, initially confused, sniffing and licking his owner's face as if trying to wake someone who won't answer. The story of this hero dog begins precisely there, in that detail many consider small, almost a forgotten background in other rescue narratives, the animal's immediate reaction, guided by instinct and a bond built over years of care, feeding, playing, and staring. Instead of barking for the sake of barking, Thor did something that transformed the family's fate. He grabbed his cell phone firmly, as if on a mission, and ran down the street lit only by streetlights, following a script that seemed rehearsed by the force of a hidden truth, the connection between human and dog that transcends words. Imagine the impact. A small object in the jaws of an animal racing against time. Light footsteps on the sidewalk, shadows passing through half-open doors, neighbors peering through their windows, thinking it was a dream or a nightmare. It was the last possible call, the last thread of hope that could be woven between the accident and help. When Thor reached the house of his neighbor Marcello, a man who worked as a community worker and always had his phone nearby, he left his cell phone at his feet and returned to Roberto, as if knowing the mission wasn't yet complete. Marcello answered, heard the shaky voice on the other end, realized the urgency, and called emergency services. In minutes that felt like hours, sirens approached, neighbors gathered, and what could have been just another tragedy became a story of salvation. Telling this story isn't just recapping facts. It's understanding the chain of decisions that, in a chain, changed a destiny. The dog's decision to act, the neighbor's decision to respond quickly, the emergency team's decision to enter through the back door. Each choice carried weight, and together they formed a journey of transformation for the family. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding what led Thor to act that way involves looking beyond raw instinct and considering elements of training, shared memories, and even changes in family mentality that, without realizing it, trained the dog to be a rescue agent. Thor wasn't born knowing how to carry a cell phone. He learned, perhaps without formal theory, but through exposure, watching his owner handle the device, hearing beeps that signaled help, being rewarded for fetching objects in games, and above all, feeling that this was a way to protect those he loves. There's a scientific side to this narrative. Studies on canine behavior show that animals with a strong bond with their owners can interpret minimal signs of distress and act accordingly. But there's also a human side, made up of small revelations and behind-the-scenes details that only reveal themselves to those who observe closely. The training routine hidden among household chores, the stories told at the table about teaching the dog to fetch, the conscious decisions to keep emergency numbers visible or practice simple search and retrieval commands. In that home, seemingly trivial decisions became the basis for a colossal impact. And what about the emotional effect? The transformation that occurs when, after the scare, the family realizes that a four-legged friend was the link between despair and salvation is profound. It changes the way we view the presence of an animal in the home, alters priorities, and even redefines what we consider preparedness for everyday emergencies. There are also hidden truths in this process. For example, how much we underestimate dogs' ability to make decisions in critical moments, or how many families fail to train behaviors that could be essential precisely because of a lack of information or a mindset that separates pet from life partner. This story reveals behind-the-scenes experiences, hours of companionship, small routines of affection, and a silent investment in behavior that ended up becoming an unofficial emergency service that morning. As I describe each part of this context, questions arise that are worth reflecting on. What else can we teach our dogs so that in the future they can act effectively? What practical decisions do we make today that can have a real impact tomorrow? And how does our journey with these animals gradually transform the mindset of the entire household? By recounting step by step what happened on that street and the sequence that led to the arrival of help, we realize that the story is, at once, a narrative of courage and an implicit manual of common sense, having recorded numbers, keeping doors accessible, training basic commands, and above all, observing and valuing behavioral cues that can be crucial in emergencies. Following this line, the details that follow show exactly how each element of the context, the place, the time, the characters, and the dog's actions combine to produce an unlikely and powerful solution. Comment, "I'm on this journey too." The sound of paws echoing on the asphalt seemed louder than ever, as if each step were a rhythm of urgency beating against the heart of the observer. Thor ran as if he carried the family's very fate between his teeth. The imaginary camera followed in slow motion, the reflection of the moon on the cell phone screen, the fur standing on end with tension, the fixed gaze ahead. The street, previously silent, began to come to life. A window opened, a light came on, and the neighbor, still drowsy, saw a scene that seemed straight out of a movie. He bent down, picked up his cell phone, and realized something was very wrong. The screen was still on, an unfinished emergency call, and in the background, on the line, heavy, drawn-out breathing, Marcelo's heart raced. He knew this family, knew Roberto would never pull such a prank. He ran inside, called his wife, and within seconds was on the phone with emergency services. The dispatcher's voice was firm, asking for directions, details, any clues. On the other end, the sound of sirens began to build in the distance, first a distant whisper, then growing louder until it dominated the early morning. Meanwhile, Thor didn't stop. He ran back home, entered through the half-open door, and lay down next to his owner, as if to say, "Hang in there. Help is coming." The tension in the air was almost palpable. Roberto's breathing became more irregular. Time seemed to stretch. At the gate, the first lanterns illuminated the garden, and hurried footsteps invaded the scene. Paramedics entered and, within seconds, assessed the situation. One of them murmured, "That was close." Roberto's wife, who had been in shock until then, hugged the dog tightly, tears streaming down her face. "He saved his life," she repeated over and over, almost like a mantra, looking at the neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. The sirens had stopped, but the music of the moment still echoed in everyone's minds. The sound of the dog's footsteps, the distant ringing of the phone, the crunch of the ambulance's wheels on the gravel. Every detail seemed to carry symbolic weight, as if everyone were facing a revelation about what truly matters. That early morning became a kind of rite of passage, where fear, hope, and gratitude blended into a single scene. And the most impressive thing was seeing the change in mentality that took place in those minutes. Neighbors who had barely greeted each other began exchanging knowing glances, as if they had been invited to participate in a collective journey. One of them, in a low voice, said, "I've never seen anything like it. It's like he knew what he was doing." This phrase hung in the air, reinforcing the idea that there is something profound in the relationship between humans and dogs. Something that goes beyond instinct and obedience, a hidden truth that only emerges in times of crisis. As Roberto was placed on a stretcher and taken to the hospital, Thor remained at the door, watching every movement. His body was tense, but his eyes conveyed relief, as if he knew his mission was accomplished. There was no celebration, no fireworks, just a respectful silence that enveloped everyone present. This silence spoke volumes, that this animal had been the link between life and death, and that from that night on, nothing would be the same. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the human reaction after rescue is truly a spectacle. It's not just tears or hugs, but something that shakes the emotional fabric of everyone involved. Psychologists call it a turning point, when an intense experience redefines the way we view life. And that's exactly what happened on that street. Roberto's wife, for example, later confessed that the moment she saw Thor lying next to his owner, she understood that the dog was more than a pet. He was part of the family on a level she had never realized. Marcelo, the neighbor, said he started leaving his cell phone charged and visible every night, something he'd never done before. Small decisions began to carry more weight, as if each gesture could impact future situations. This kind of revelation is powerful because it changes behaviors, generates new routines, and most importantly, creates an invisible support network between people and animals. It's not about superstition or overly romanticizing the situation, but about recognizing that sometimes it takes an extreme situation to awaken a sense of urgency and community. And perhaps that's why stories like this resonate so deeply with those who hear them. They expose our vulnerabilities, but they also show what we're made of when the unexpected happens. They remind us that there's strength behind the scenes of everyday life, in our relationships with our neighbors, in the attention we pay to cues, in the way we choose to prepare ourselves. This is a narrative that goes beyond the idea of a dog story and enters the realm of personal transformation. It's a reminder that simple decisions, like practicing commands or staying calm, can be the difference between panic and resolution. Everyone who was there that night left differently. For some, it was simply a successful emergency story. But for others, it was the beginning of a deep reflection on how to connect more with animals and the people around them. Perhaps that's what makes these stories resonate so strongly. They don't end when the ambulance leaves. They linger in our minds, transforming our mindset, challenging us to think about what we would do if we were in the same situation. Comment: this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because understanding what moves a dog to act in such a critical moment requires more than admiration. It requires looking at the science, the training, and the emotional underpinnings that shape this relationship. It's not just raw instinct. There's a combination of factors: shared memories, positive reinforcement over time, continuous observation of human behavior, and an almost intuitive sensitivity to the owner's emotional state that allows the animal to identify the emergency and respond effectively. Research and practical experience with service and rescue dogs shows that they learn to associate minimal signals: a longer sigh, a blank stare, the dropping of an object, with the need for action. In other words, the transformation we see on a night like that isn't born of chance, but of a journey of coexistence where seemingly small decisions generate real impact. Observing Thor on that street, we noticed patterns that appear in stories of hero dogs: selective attention to movement, the ability to discriminate sounds, such as the owner's tone of voice, and a predisposition to seek physical contact to calm and assess the situation. Canine behavior experts often explain that even without formal training, dogs who live with a family for years learn to map routines and recognize variations. In homes where the owner answers the phone in emergency situations, for example, the dog begins to associate the sound of the phone ringing with the need to seek help or approach the owner. If this is practiced repeatedly, with rewards and reinforcement, the behavior tends to solidify as a response strategy. But there's also a deep emotional component that many don't consider. The mindset of the owner and family directly influences what the animal learns. When a home values attention, responds to the dog's behavior with affection and recognition, and includes the animal in daily routines, the animal internalizes a social role. It stops being just a pet and becomes a partner in the family dynamic. This role shift is a hidden truth that only emerges in extreme situations. The dog acts because it feels responsible, because it's integrated into the emotional network, and because it has seen that its actions provoke human reactions that benefit its loved ones. Therefore, decisions such as reinforcing simple fetches, training delivery commands, and maintaining a predictable environment have a practical and direct impact when an emergency arises. From a practical standpoint, there are training techniques that dramatically increase a dog's chances of responding effectively in a crisis. Experienced trainers recommend starting with basic retrieval, teaching the dog to retrieve an object and hand it to the owner or another person, and progressing to scenario simulations, always with positive reinforcement. The goal is to create a repertoire of behaviors that can be triggered almost automatically when stress takes over. It's important to remember that each dog has limits. The learning journey must respect the animal's personality, anxiety level, and history. Some dogs are naturally more resilient, others require more emotional support during training. And it is precisely this combination of technique and sensitivity that over time creates an unlikely rescue agent. Another layer of this story is how communities react and contribute to the saving effect. In Thor's account, the presence of his neighbor Marcello was decisive. He heeded the implicit call of that canine gesture and made quick decisions. This illustrates a behind-the-scenes point that deserves attention. The human social network surrounding a family directly influences the impact of animal actions. When neighbors are aware, when collective care routines exist, and when people allow themselves to act promptly, the result can be the difference between a tragic outcome and a positive turnaround. Transformation, therefore, is collective. It depends not just on the dog, nor just on the owner, but on the synchronized decisions of several people. There are also important insights into how small routine changes can prevent risky situations or increase response capacity. Placing your cell phone on charge in an accessible location, programming emergency contacts into a visible shortcut, teaching children to recognize signs of illness, and keeping doors unlocked in specific situations are simple measures that have a real impact. When these decisions are incorporated into your routine, they act as layers of security that combined increase the likelihood of a successful intervention. The truth is that prevention and preparation transform fear into action and lessen the burden of chance. Emotionally, what's most striking is the lasting impact such an episode has on the family and community. A dog's behavior during a crisis can redefine priorities, alter the perception of animals' value, and trigger concrete changes in daily behavior. People who witness this type of event often report a shift in mindset. They begin to value time with their pet more, invest in training, and view their animals as active parts of their life journey. Companions capable of providing not only affection, but also practical answers in critical moments. This is the transformation that overflows from the episode and continues to influence future decisions. It's also crucial to recognize that not all stories end the same way. Luck, the individual's previous health, and the speed of care are factors that cannot be ignored. Still, what unites stories like Thor's is the demonstration of a bond that, when well nurtured, produces real impact. A connection between emotion and action that challenges the idea that animals are merely reflexes. They are social agents, capable of bringing about change when their capabilities are stimulated and valued. And it is precisely this combination of science, affection, and practice that allows us to view these narratives with a mix of respect and a desire to learn. Now, as we consider how to apply this to our daily lives, without turning our lives into a crash course in survival, but rather incorporating sensible decisions and gentle training, we realize that the true legacy of a story like this is an invitation to reflect how we can better prepare our homes, how we can recognize subtle signs, and how we can transform routine into security. Every choice counts. Every small gesture behind the scenes has the potential to make an impact, and a hero dog's journey begins long before the dawn of their action making the news. Comment: that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And this is where the story takes on layers that go far beyond Thor's run down the street. After the rescue, the family's life entered a new chapter, not the one that makes headlines, but the one written in the small everyday gestures, in the silent decisions that changed the routines and emotional signatures of the household. Roberto spent a few days in the hospital, receiving care, and the recovery, though slow, was steady. physical therapy, visits, simple rehabilitation exercises. At each step of recovery, the presence of the dog by his side was an anchor. The impact wasn't just physical. It was a psychological transformation so powerful that the family dynamic itself was redefined. What was once a routine home gained the depth of someone who learned firsthand that life can change in a second, and that the bonds that sustain a family do indeed include an animal participating in the journey. The tributes came in whatever form the community chose. A story in the local newspaper, neighbors offering to help with grocery shopping, and even a small informal ceremony in front of the house, where children and adults left letters and cookies for Thor. Some suggested a more formal recognition, a symbolic community dog badge from an animal welfare organization, and while the family laughed and cried with so much attention, the most significant change occurred in their internal mindset. Before the incident, decisions like where to leave the cell phone or who to call emergency services were trivial. Afterward, they became priorities discussed with the same seriousness as travel plans or a budget. This is the hidden truth that many stories fail to reveal. The practical impact isn't limited to the heroic act. It reverberates in everyday choices. And speaking of practical choices, there are objective lessons learned from that night that any viewer can apply without turning their home into an operations center. A first step is to teach the dog basic retrieval, not as a show trick, but as a helpful behavior. Start by having the animal retrieve an object, a toy, for example, and hand it to its owner, reinforcing each successful response with a reward, affection, and calm. The progression is natural. Once the dog understands that handing something over generates positive feedback, you can practice in different locations and with different people, varying the level of distraction until the action becomes a habit that can be triggered in stressful situations. The second practical decision is to keep emergency numbers visible and accessible, not just saved on your phone, but in familiar places. A note on the refrigerator, an ice contact in your phone's shortcuts, and a simple plan, so any neighbor or child knows who to call in case of need. The third helpful measure involves accessories that make the act easier. Cell phone cases with a holder to attach to the collar, small pouches on the dog's chest to hold a contact card or a whistle, or even simple signaling devices that can help attract attention when the animal arrives at a different home. These three actions taken together transform opportunity into preparation, and preparation into a greater likelihood of a positive outcome. But beyond the practical instructions, there's an emotional dimension worth highlighting: the gratitude that overwhelms those who have gone through the experience. Roberto's wife, for example, began talking about the dog with a newfound, almost reverential respect, and began telling the story to relatives who previously barely knew the animal's name. This recognition materialized in increased care, regular vet visits, investment in quality food, and time dedicated to gentle training that strengthens the bond without making it exhausting for the pet. The journey, therefore, becomes a virtuous cycle. The more care and attention given to the dog, the better prepared the homes are for potential emergencies. It's a sequence of simple decisions that together create a new standard of coexistence and responsibility. There are also revelations about how communities change after such an episode. In many neighborhoods, these stories become narratives of identity. The street where the dog saved the life becomes a landmark that brings neighbors together, encourages support groups, and sometimes motivates larger actions, such as short first aid courses offered by local associations. The transformation isn't just private, it's collective. And this dynamic reinforces the idea that social resilience depends on small acts of citizenship, keeping in touch with neighbors, knowing how to share important information, and acting promptly when the unexpected happens. In Thor's case, Marcelo's promptness was decisive. He could have ignored the animal in the early hours of the morning. He might not have recognized the urgency, but the choice to respond and act made all the difference. It's a reminder that, in a chain reaction, human decisions amplify or mitigate the impact of animal actions. Another facet of this narrative is the shift in mindset regarding the role of pets. Instead of seeing them merely as companions, many families are beginning to view dogs as active agents in the family journey, partners who participate in the routine, influence decisions, and can, with proper training and affection, play a protective role. This shift brings responsibilities, training with patience, understanding the animal's limits, and ensuring that its well-being is a priority, even when the goal is to increase its usefulness in emergencies. The delicate nature of this balance is a behind-the-scenes aspect that few people emphasize, but which, for those who have experienced it, is crucial. And finally, it's worth considering the legacy a story like this leaves. The account of a desperate dawn that becomes a life-saving experience reveals something about our own way of life. How much have we invested in real connections? What simple decisions are we putting off that could one day save a loved one? The transformation that accompanies an episode like this is often more valuable than the news itself. It changes habits, builds empathy, and reorients priorities. And if there's one thing we can learn from Thor and his family, it's that preparation is an ongoing exercise, not a singular moment, but a journey in which every step counts. Now that you know the immediate outcome, the changes, and the practical lessons that emerged from that night, it's time to look ahead and understand how to apply these ideas to your daily life. Without drama, with simple, consistent decisions that increase safety and positive impact wherever you live. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. If you've been with me this far, thank you for following this story so closely. If you want to continue receiving real stories, practical tips on canine behavior, and simple ideas to increase your home security, subscribe to the channel. That's how I know it's worth bringing you more useful and well-researched content. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like. This simple gesture shows that the connection we created here resonated and helps us continue producing with care. Write the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," in the comments. I want to see who made it to the end and share other stories and lessons learned that truly matter with you. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click it and follow me there. It will be great to continue this journey together.